Thanks for joining us again today for another episode of our Nonprofit Fundamentals video series. Today, Adam and I wanted to talk a little bit about budgeting. So budgeting is a really important process for nonprofits and for-profits to go through. It's designed to give you some guidance during the year about where you're spending your expenses, how much you plan on spending for the year, and ultimately the goal is to make sure that your operations are running smoothly and you're either breaking even or generating a surplus even. So that way you can continue to fill your mission and overall grow the organization if that's the stage that you're in as a nonprofit.
So how do you do it, right? That's the first question. So essentially what you do is you start with last year. That's really the starting point for anyone. You take last year's numbers, bring it forward, and then you start going down the line. Are there going to be changes in personnel? Are there going to be raises? Are you in growth mode? Are you hiring? Do you need more services? Is there more cost needed for programs? This is a group process across the entire organization. Right. This is not just a task for your finance department. So a lot of these questions you need to ask need to be answered by other departments. So your development team, how much are they expecting to bring in that year? Is there going to be new grants with costs associated with that? That all needs to be budgeted and incorporated into that budget.
Mm-hmm. And some of it you may want to collaborate with your board, some of your program directors as well. They'll have some insight into the overall program and how they're operating and if they're expanding or shrinking. So it really is like a full group project, from either the board all the way down to your staff.
So one question I get a lot of times from boards and from organizations is they're looking at their budget and they always ask me, should this be on cash or accrual basis? Mm-hmm. Do you have the answer for them?
I say both.
Both.
I think as a nonprofit, looking at your budget from a cash flow perspective is going to give you a different perspective than when you look at it from a GAAP and an accrual perspective. So when it comes to nonprofits, the revenue recognition can be a little tricky when it comes to contributions. So we talked about this in another episode where a lot of times nonprofits, a contribution comes in and you may not spend it until the next year. So in that instance, you're going to have revenue recognized in one year, but the expenses are going to be in another. So therefore, if you look at a cash basis projection or budget, it's going to look a little different than your GAAP and accrual one. So I really think for a nonprofit, it's kind of important to look at both.
Okay, both.
Mm-hmm. Both.
Double the work.
Sorry. Yeah.
So the other thing with budgeting is, a lot of organizations are sometimes struggling with their programs, and the way to really understand how each program is doing is really doing budgets for each individual programs. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about budgeting, we're not just talking necessarily about the whole organization. We're talking even getting more in-depth to the individual programs and trying to figure out which ones are profitable, which ones are not, which ones have more spending. And it's also important with that to really allocate those indirect costs. Mm-hmm. You want to move those costs over and see which programs are really driving the organization forward and which programs decisions need to be made.
Right. So I usually suggest, showing your revenue, showing your direct costs, and then seeing if that program is profitable, and then also allocating out the overhead that you may have within the trial balance to still get the overall organization picture. So one budget is going to be by line item, like certain revenue streams, as well as all your various expense accounts. And that's going to give you the overall budget for the organization. But when you break it down on a different level by program or by grantor, that should also still tie into the total organization numbers, but in a different view for you. So that way management can make the right decisions about which program should be cut, or, how do you fundraise a supplement? Fundraise more to be able to supplement that lost income on those programs so you can make the right decisions.
How much time do we budget for this video?
10 minutes?
Okay. I'm not sure we're at 10 minutes, but the other thing that's important with budgeting is, taking a look throughout the year, doing revisions. So let's say we budget for 10 minutes. I'm not sure where we're at right now, but we may need to revise that now that we're further along. Mm-hmm. When you start the year, that's your best guess. But as you progress throughout the year, things change, maybe a grant or a large pledge that was supposed to come in did not. You don't have that money now, so now you need to go back and fix those costs. You know, you could say you're on budget with your costs, but if your revenues change, that's not going to be really helpful. That's not really an accurate picture.
Maybe you get a new grant, maybe you open
Yeah.
a new program. So it's
A lot
definitely
more positive than my negativity there.
it's definitely important to revisit your budget and revise it throughout the year.
Yeah. So any closing thoughts on budgeting?
Budget versus actual reports. So not just revising it throughout the year and changing your budget when situations change, but also running a budget versus actual report. So I think that's really informative for management to be done on a quarterly basis as well as an annual basis. Run those budget versus actual numbers and then see where you need to make changes in the future.
So definitely important. All budgeting as an organization is, I'll say, absolutely vital that you have a budget and you review the budget throughout the year.
And make it something that suits you. So it doesn't need to be overly complicated if you're a smaller nonprofit. I think you just got to design it best for what works for you. So a really important thing to consider also when it comes to budget versus actual reports, whether you're running them on a quarterly basis or an annual basis, is that you have to make sure that you're reconciling the balance sheet accounts as well. So when you're doing a budget, you're typically looking at your revenue and expenses and what you project for the whole year. When you're running the budget versus actual, if you don't have your balance sheet reconciled, it's going to impact the revenue and expenses. So if you don't have the right prepaid expense number, it's going to impact your expenses. If you don't have the right AR balance on your books and records, then it's going to impact your revenue number. So I think that's a really important thing to touch on when it comes to your budget versus actual reports, is making sure that your balance sheet is also reconciled to give you the best picture of what your revenue and expenses look like.
It's definitely not a good idea to make decisions based off bad numbers. So definitely a good point. All right, well, thank you everyone. Until next time.